SLU-PP-332 for weight loss. No diet change, no exercise, the fat still burned. I mean, imagine if that was true. What if you could just burn the fat at the rate of a trained athlete without changing your diet, or even you when you're younger, without even exercising? Well, that's what a lot of people are claiming around SLU-PP. And so in this video, we're going to deconstruct why this could be perceived as true, but also while it's completely not true. And so let's dive in. I'm Regan Archibald, founder of Ageless Future. We practice longevity medicine. I want to help you feel, look, and perform your best no matter what age you are. I've got a phenomenal team. We've got licenses in all 50 states. We just put peptide protocols together for you based on what your labs show. Then our pharmacy just ships it right to your house. These are not research use only peptides. We're not promoting peptides. We're promoting your longevity and your health. So let's jump into the science. So is there an exercise mimetic? Well, here's some peer-reviewed data from Washington University. And in 2024, they looked at a compound called SLU-PP-332. Now, it's not a peptide. It just gets put in this performance-enhancing category. And they found that it increased fatty acid oxidation by 25%, raised resting energy expenditure, shrank visceral fat deposits, and it even improved insulin sensitivity. Now, this was in animals, but these animals were fed this obesity-induced diet. And so they actually had a massive body composition change without any physical activity or without changes in their diet. Now, these are mice. You're not a mouse. Well, unless you are, and there's some weird like neural link that Elon Musk has discovered that we can implant in mice, but I don't think that's possible. So here's the interesting thing. When you look at this mechanic shift in the body, let's talk about how your body processes energy and what's actually happening, because this is one of the most important things. Because weight loss, the big problem that nobody's solving correctly is the problem of this energy conversion. So the dominant conversation in weight loss right now are GLP-1 agonists. This is semaglutide, tirzepatide, retatrutide. Now, these are powerful drugs that suppress appetite and drive significant weight loss. Now, retatrutide is the one that does also increase your energy expenditure, which is phenomenal. But if you think about, most people are losing weight because they're in a caloric restricted state through appetite suppression. When you lose weight by eating less without an exercise stimulus, you lose both fat and muscle. And that's been the big criticism around GLP-1s. Your metabolic rate drops, your thyroid starts to shut down. And then if you go off the GLP-1s, you put all the weight back on. And so when the weight returns, often you have worse metabolic markers than before. So it's not a permanent solution. It's a pause. And the real goal of metabolic medicine is not just fat removal, it's improving the underlying mechanism. So I want you to lose weight once and lose it for good, but not be dependent on a GLP-1, not be dependent on SLU-PP, mitochondrial peptides, or anything else. But we just want to shift the gears in your body. And so the underlying mechanism, the most important part, is your mitochondrial capacity to oxidize fat efficiently. And yes, you can do this with cold exposure. That's one of our core 6 essentials. Whenever you start a program with us, we're going to tell you to get some cold exposure. And then that changes your resting energy expenditure and insulin sensitivity. So the cellular infrastructure that keeps fat from coming back is the most important part. Now, SLU-PP-332, it does target exactly that underlying mechanism. It works on these estrogen-related receptors, the alpha, the beta, and the gamma. And by working on these pathways, you get this increase in mitochondrial biogenesis, more mitochondria. You turn on PGC1 alpha, now you got the genes expressed, and now you can keep the fat off. And so here's the mechanism. So, this is an estrogen-related pan-agonist. So it's activating all 3 of these estrogen-related pathways simultaneously. Now, these are nuclear receptors that govern mitochondrial biogenesis, fatty acid oxidation, and oxidative phosphorylation. Now, when you activate them, you shift your body's fuel preference from carbohydrates and glucose to fat. Now think about adding in some ketones to this like BHB, beta hydroxybutyrate. Now you're going to increase your rate at which mitochondria oxidizes fatty acids. Now you raise resting energy expenditure, the number of calories your body burns at rest. This means you may feel warmer, you may sweat easier. That's a known side effect of using SLU-PP-332. You want to think of this more as changing the software that runs the metabolic engine. And this software update is actually really critical. Now, if you think of what 5-amino-1-MQ is, or 1-methylquinine, it's a peptide that turns off one of the pathways that causes the body to store excess fat, and it's called NNMT. But if you can turn off that NNMT, now you're turning on AMPK, the body's energy pathway. Now that's working on AMPK, completely different pathways than NNMT. Now you add in SLU-PP, now you're working on these estrogen-related receptors, the alpha, the beta, and the gamma. Now you're going to see this massive transformation in this performance-based medicine. Now I think this is really important because so much of the research and so much of the work is just done on this appetite suppression from the GLP-1s, but now that we've got retatrutide in the mix, you're not going to get the same appetite suppression with retatrutide, but because it's got glucagon in there, you're going to see this transformation in your mitochondrial biogenesis. And so here's a study with SLU-PP. Now, SLU-PP is really important, and the reason I'm bringing up these other peptides is because you want to cycle these. You want to pulse different pathways. You would not want to turn off NNMT all the time, for example, with 5-amino-1-MQ. Just pulse it for 60 to 90 days and go off of it for a while. Same with SLU-PP. You don't want to have these receptor agonists continually pulsed. You just want to take breaks. Same with growth hormone. But in one of the studies in these diet-induced obese mice, where they showed a 25% increase in fatty acid oxidation, they found they had improved insulin sensitivity. But the interesting thing they found is that they had a reduction in the visceral fat, all without calorie restriction or without exercise intervention. Now, the visceral fat's really important because if you think about what happens when you have visceral fat, these typically are white fat cells and they're recruiting other fats. And it accumulates around the organ systems. It's not necessarily cosmetic. This is where people are called skinny fat. It's inflammatory. It drives insulin resistance. It secretes hormones that disrupt your metabolic function. And so reducing visceral fat, it's not just about the looks. It's actually one of the most powerful interventions for metabolic health. And so this is where cold exposure becomes really important because what cold does is it triggers what's called beige fat activation, where you get these mitochondria that are like accumulated in the center of the cell, and now they can migrate to the external part of the cell. Now, one of the studies and one of the peptides discovered is called adipotide. And adipotide turned off and killed the blood vessel supply to the white blood cells. Now, there's a lot more research that needs to go on with adipotide, but there's a lot of targeted therapies. But when I look at SLU-PP-332 and even its oral bioavailable analog, which is SLU-915, you're going to see that it's very comparable to getting cold exposure or exercising. And it does confirm that when you take it orally, that this ERR pathway is a viable target. And maybe in the future, we'll see in the human clinical trials, it treating obesity or type 2 diabetes or even sarcopenia. And the researchers explicitly say that this is a treatment for obesity, not just weight management. It could be a future where there's some permanent changes. Now, I don't want anybody stuck on a peptide, a small molecule, a GLP-1 for the rest of their life. And this is where it's interesting because once you turn on these genes and these pathways, and then you apply exercise and cold exposure, I think this is where we can have massive gains in peak performance and actually see this ability to lose weight for good. Now, this molecule, SLU-PP-332, it's not FDA approved, and it still is cutting edge and investigational science. At Ageless Future, we're tracking this very closely, and we want to integrate it very responsibly. That's why we run blood labs on every single person who comes in, whether you're an elite endurance athlete or you test your metabolism frequently, you're looking at your CO2 consumed and produced, you're also looking at your VO2 max. Maybe you're somebody who hasn't exercised in 10 years. Maybe you're somebody who has so much pain, you're going to need some regenerative medicine to get you off the couch. But no matter where you are, all you need to do is go to agelessfuture.com. We've got a team of very caring individuals. Schedule your free intro call and then get your blood work ran. And we'll help you get to the bottom of why your body's not losing weight, why your metabolism's broken. And for those of you who want to go deeper into what SLU-PP-332 actually can do, go to my video, What is SLU-PP-332? I'll see you there.